Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling mental models.
Ooh, mental model.
Using mental models. Mastering the Art of Clear Thinking by John Cousins.
Sounds dense.
It's a good one though. I
Yeah.
think, mental models, they're basically like the frameworks we use to understand the world, make decisions,
Yeah.
solve problems. So like having a toolbox full of different thinking lenses.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, so instead of just using the same hammer for every problem,
Right.
you've got a saw and a screwdriver.
Exactly.
So before we get into the specifics,
Yeah.
why are these mental models so important? What's the big deal about them?
Well, the book actually starts with a quote by Charles Darwin,
Okay.
and he says, ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and it really connects to this idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Where the less we know.
The more confident we are.
Exact.
Which can be a dangerous combination.
Yeah, definitely. So mental models can help us kind of combat that a little bit.
Okay, so they help us see beyond our own limited perspective and realize how much we don't know.
Exactly. And the book uses this analogy of a map and territory.
Okay.
So just like a map is a simplified representation of a landscape, mental models are kind of simplified versions of reality.
So like the map might show you the highways and the towns, but it's not going to show every pothole and detour you might encounter.
Exactly. And it's still useful to have the map, even though
For sure.
it's not perfect.
Yeah, it's better than driving around with no map at all.
Right. Absolutely. So mental models, they help us cut through that complexity
Right.
and make sense of the world.
So we've talked about how they can help us avoid that like blind confidence and also grapple with the complexity of the world. But can you give me like a concrete example of how a mental model might actually work in practice?
Sure. So think about something as everyday as going to the grocery store. You have a mental model for how that works, right? You grab a cart, you navigate the aisles, you pick your items, you go to the checkout.
Right, and you don't have to reinvent that process every single time you go.
Exactly, because that mental model simplifies it for you.
Right, but what if they rearrange the store?
Yeah.
Or your favorite brand is out of stock? Does that mean like our mental models can be wrong or at least like outdated?
Yeah, that's a great point. It highlights the fact that mental models can be limiting if they become too rigid. So we need to be willing to update them,
Okay.
revise them as we encounter new information.
So it's not just about having these static mental models, it's about being flexible and knowing when to use which one.
Exactly. It's like choosing the right tool for the job.
I like that, a toolkit.
Yeah.
So if mental models are the tools, how do we go about building this toolkit?
Well, we can learn from successful thinkers like Charlie Munger. He talks about this lattice work approach,
Oh, lattice work.
drawing wisdom from various fields like psychology, history, economics, physics.
Okay, that sounds pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, it can be.
Where do we even begin? And how do we know, like, which models are the most important ones to have in our toolkit?
Well, that's where we'll start to unpack things in part 2.
Okay, so to recap, we've established that mental models are basically like the frameworks we use to understand the world.
Yes.
And building a diverse set of them is like having a mental toolkit for better thinking.
Absolutely.
We also talked about the limitations of mental models, remembering that the map is not the territory, and being willing to adapt those models as we learn and grow.
Very important.
Well, listeners, we're just getting warmed up.
Yes, we are.
Coming up in part 2, we'll explore how these mental models shape what you see, influence your decisions, and maybe even reveal some blind spots you didn't know you had. Stick around.
Definitely. Welcome back, everybody. So as promised, let's actually get into some of the specific ways that mental models impact our thinking and decision-making.
Yeah, in part 1, we talked about building this mental model toolkit. What's like the first tool we should really try to master?
Well, let's revisit the map is not the territory model, because this is really crucial
Okay.
for using any mental model effectively.
So it's not just about like acquiring these mental models, it's about understanding their limitations.
Exactly.
Right.
Think back to that grocery store example.
Okay.
You know, you have that mental model that guides you through the aisles, but what happens if they remodel the store?
Right. It throws you off completely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your map doesn't match the territory anymore, and you end up feeling frustrated.
It's like when a website you use all the time changes its layout.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so annoying.
So this model is all about being aware that our mental maps, however useful they are, are still simplifications that could be outdated?
So it's a reminder to stay flexible and update our mental maps as we encounter new information.
Exactly.
And also, like, acknowledging that our understanding of the world is always incomplete.
Right. It's about intellectual humility.
How do you think this applies to decision-making?
Well, I guess it would encourage us to be open to new information.
Yeah.
And avoid clinging too tightly to like our initial assumptions.
Exactly. Our initial perception isn't always correct.
Okay.
We need to be willing to challenge our own beliefs and look for different perspectives.
Okay, I'm starting to see how powerful this is.
Yeah,
It's not just about using mental models, it's about using them wisely.
absolutely. So let's shift gears to another essential model, the growth mindset.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of this one?
Yeah, Carol Dweck.
Yes.
It's about embracing challenges and seeing failure as an opportunity to learn.
Exactly. It's the belief that you can cultivate your abilities.
Instead of saying like, I'm not good at this, you ask, what can I learn from this?
Exactly. Through dedication and effort. And the book quotes Hyman Rickover, who said, "Success teaches us nothing. Only failure is educational."
I love that quote. It really changes your perspective on things. But honestly, it's easier said than done, right? Like, how do we actually shift from feeling discouraged by failure to seeing it as like a stepping stone?
Well, it speaks to the importance of consciously cultivating that growth mindset,
Okay.
recognizing that our brains are like muscles, they can grow and adapt.
So it's a continuous process, not just a switch you flip in your mind.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
need to challenge those negative self-beliefs and focus on that learning process.
And this ties back to that map is not the territory model, right?
Yes,
Our mental maps about our own abilities, they can be inaccurate.
exactly. And a growth mindset encourages us to challenge those maps and redraw them based on effort and learning.
Okay, so we've talked about avoiding blind confidence and embracing a growth mindset.
Mhm.
What other mental models are crucial for effective decision-making?
Well, let's talk about the circle of competence. This is a reminder to stay within our areas of expertise.
Stay in your lane.
Exactly, and avoid venturing into unfamiliar territory,
Okay.
where we're more likely to make mistakes.
I'm thinking about that Dirty Harry quote. A man's got to know his limitations.
Exactly, and the book highlights Warren Buffett as a prime example. He's known for avoiding industries he doesn't understand, even if they look profitable.
Okay.
Knowing the boundaries of your expertise is crucial.
So it's not just what you know, but what you don't know.
Exactly.
How do we actually define our circle of competence?
It takes honest self-assessment. You might ask yourself, what areas have I spent years studying or practicing? Where have I consistently made good judgments? What feedback have I received from trusted sources?
Okay, so identifying those areas where we have a track record of success, understanding based on experience and feedback.
Exactly.
Yeah, being honest with ourselves about our strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. Now, while it's smart to stay within your circle of competence,
Yeah.
there's also value in expanding it strategically.
So don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone,
Right.
but do so cautiously.
Exactly. And that's where first principles thinking comes in.
Okay.
It's about breaking down complex problems.
Elon Musk and his rockets.
Exactly. Instead of accepting conventional wisdom, you ask, why is this the way it is? You break things down to their core elements and you explore alternative approaches.
That sounds super powerful, but also kind of intimidating.
It can be.
How do we actually cultivate this first principles thinking in our own lives?
That's a great question, and that's something we're going to explore further in part 3.
Okay.
We'll delve into some practical techniques and specific examples of using first principles thinking.
Okay, so to recap part 2, we've talked about navigating uncertainty with the map is not the territory.
Yes.
Embracing challenges with a growth mindset. Recognizing our boundaries with that circle of competence.
Right.
And challenging assumptions with first principles thinking.
Very good.
I feel like my mental toolkit is getting an upgrade.
That's great to hear, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh.
There's so many more fascinating mental models to explore.
Well, listeners, you won't want to miss what's coming up next.
Definitely.
In part 3, we'll continue our deep dive into specific mental models, offering practical tips and real-world examples of how to apply them to your everyday life. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the show. I am ready to learn some more about mental models.
Me too. Let's dive back in where we left off with first principles thinking.
Okay.
Just a powerful approach for problem solving.
Right, and like we were talking about before with Elon Musk and his rockets,
Exactly.
totally revolutionized space travel by breaking down the cost of rockets.
Yeah, instead of just accepting the status quo, he was like, why is this the way it is?
Yeah.
You strip away those assumptions and you get down to the fundamental truth.
Okay, but that seems like something that only rocket scientists can do.
No, not at all. You can use it for everyday life. Like, think about if you wanted to improve your productivity. Instead of just trying the latest time management app, you could use first principles thinking to examine your actual work habits.
So really get to the bottom of like what's going on.
Exactly what are the essential elements of your work? What truly motivates you? What are the biggest obstacles to your focus?
Okay, so instead of just like jumping to solutions, you first take the time to understand the underlying principles at play.
Exactly. Think for yourself.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to another mental model that's all about challenging assumptions.
Okay.
But from a different angle, it's called inversion.
Inversion. Okay, I like the sound of that. What's that all about?
Well, it's a simple but powerful technique. You basically think backward.
Okay.
So instead of focusing on how to achieve success, you ask yourself, what would guarantee failure?
Oh, I see. So you're kind of like flipping the script.
Exactly.
Looking at it from the opposite perspective.
And by identifying those paths that lead to failure, you can then proactively avoid them.
That's interesting.
Like, let's say you're launching a new product. Instead of brainstorming ways to make it successful, you could ask, what could cause this product to completely flop?
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, you're forced to consider those potential pitfalls that you might otherwise overlook.
Yeah, like you don't even want to think about your product failing.
Right, but it's important to think about.
Okay, so this is good for risk assessment and strategic planning.
Absolutely. This leads nicely into another mental model that emphasizes thinking beyond just the immediate impact of our decisions.
Okay.
It's called second-order thinking.
So thinking about the consequences of the consequences.
Precisely. You consider those ripple effects, not just the immediate outcome.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. So imagine a company that decides to slash prices to boost sales.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Seems like a good idea initially, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when competitors respond with even lower prices?
Oh, yeah, then you get into like a price war.
Exactly. And that could end up hurting everyone involved.
So second order thinking is about anticipating those chain reactions.
Precisely those unintended consequences.
Okay, I like that.
Like a chess player thinking several moves ahead.
So it seems like a lot of these mental models are about dealing with uncertainty in different ways.
Yeah, you got it. And that brings us to probabilistic thinking.
Okay, so thinking in terms of probabilities rather than certainties.
Exactly, acknowledging that life is full of maybes.
Not just yes or no answers.
Right, and it involves understanding that some events, while unlikely, can have a huge impact.
Like that financial crisis back in 2008. Nobody saw that coming.
Exactly, and that's a good example of what the book calls a black swan event.
Okay, so how does probabilistic thinking help us prepare for those unexpected things that happen?
Well, it encourages us to assign probabilities to different outcomes.
So you're not saying this will definitely happen or this won't happen.
Exactly. We're not trying to predict the future with certainty, but we can assess risks and make more informed decisions.
It's like being a really good poker player, right?
Yeah. You know the odds, but you're still making calculated bets.
Even when you might not have the best hand.
Exactly. So we've talked about a lot of complex models today. Let's switch gears to a couple that promote simplicity.
Okay, I like simple.
Yeah. So these are called Occam's razor and Hanlon's razor.
Okay, is this like a mental declutter?
Yeah, exactly. So Occam's razor suggests that the simplest explanation is usually the best.
Oh, so like if my laptop suddenly stops working, it's probably a loose connection or a dead battery.
Exactly. Don't overthink it.
Yeah.
And then there's Hanlon's razor, which states, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity.
That's a good one.
So before you jump to conclusions and assume that somebody is trying to hurt you intentionally, consider the possibility of human error.
Or just incompetence.
Exactly. Give people the benefit of the doubt.
Okay, so we've got two more models from the four we need to talk about.
Yeah. Strong opinions, weakly held, and luck and resulting.
Just curious about that first one.
All right, so strong opinions, weakly held, is about being confident in your beliefs, but remaining open to new information.
So being willing to change your mind.
Exactly. It's like being a passionate advocate for your ideas.
But also a good listener.
Yes, and a critical thinker.
Okay.
Open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
Finding that balance between conviction and humility.
Exactly. All right, and then Luck and resulting is a model that helps us avoid misjudging decisions based solely on their outcomes.
Okay, so like if someone makes a risky investment and it pays off big time.
Exactly. We tend to assume that it was a brilliant decision.
Right.
But what if that success was largely due to luck?
Oh, I see. So it's about recognizing that luck plays a role.
Absolutely, both good and bad.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't judge decisions solely on their results, but rather on the quality of the thinking that went into making them.
So a separate process from outcome.
Exactly. And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of mental models.
That was amazing.
Okay.
I learned so much about all these different thinking tools.
It's really about continuously adding to your toolkit.
Refining your thinking
Yeah,
and applying these concepts to your life.
exactly.
Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into mental models.
Remember, building a strong mental toolkit is an investment in yourself, your growth, and your ability to navigate the world with greater clarity and wisdom. Until next time, happy thinking.